your mind, it's time to redefine. You're the spiritual quest, leaving the rest behind. Ungovernable, breaking through the status quo. We untamable, watch our spirit elevate in consciousness. Yeah, we on the rise. No system can hold us down.
Jocelyn is trying to navigate social media right now. She's on the Facebook, people. She's trying to share the feed. I am Matt. This is Jocelyn. This is Ungovernable. We are live here every Sunday night at 7 p.m. talking about mind-body balance, spirituality, all the stuff to help you keep an open mind, because there's people out there that want to close your mind so that they can control you. Bam. Nailed it.
I feel like that's transhumanism.
That's it. Oh, Jesus. This one's been talking about transhumanism.
For anyone who watches Dell, that was an interesting one.
Yeah. So a reminder that help us out with the algo. Give us a like, a subscribe, a follow, a share. And we are here live, and we have an awesome guest. We always have an awesome guest, which means you can take part in the conversation. So if you have questions or comments or anything like that, what we're talking about, throw it into the comments, and we will get you into the conversation. So we have one last piece of business.
Oh, it's new.
Yes. We got
tagged, double tap.
We got, oh yeah, we totally,
Maybe I should tag.
I dropped the ball on that one. We mixed up a little bit. So normally we open a bottle of wine, and usually it's a dry farm wine. We recently went to a buddy's brewery over in Whippany.
It opened a year ago.
And
it was our first time.
This is, I got to rotate it. This is Double Tap Brewery's
Whippany.
Way Back Amber Ale. Yep, they're based out of Whippany, New Jersey.
And we tried a bunch of them.
Yeah,
they're all good.
Yeah, we tried.
No,
I'm kidding.
Taste tested.
Yes, we had a couple of tastes, and
so good.
I gotta tell you, most breweries I go to, I like maybe one of the beers.
Yeah,
there was like 5 or 6 of them that I absolutely loved. I would drink any night. So, do you want to do the honor?
I feel like you should do it near the mic for that sound.
Oh, you want like the ASMR? Like, let's see if it works.
Oh,
I don't know. That's good. That's a good one. Okay. All right. Meanwhile,
let me pour.
Meanwhile, our guest Nicholas is sitting in the blue room, like, what the hell is going on in this show?
Use a Modella glass.
Yes. No, that'll be mine. Anyway.
Use Ani.
So, let me read on our guest. Nicholas Wazierski, or Nick, but I'll call him Nicholas because that's what he prefers, was born in Western Alaska on the, I'm going to butcher this name, Kus-ko-kwim River, steeped in the wisdom of knowing where his food comes from. I love that. Catching salmon, gathering berries, and hunting caribou and moose. He dedicated his life to the practice of empowering humans to live an embodied life. He currently runs a holistic health client called Wandering Bear Wellness in Western Washington State. Nicholas, how are you, sir?
Thank you for that introduction, and nice to see some beers getting cracked.
Yeah.
I love Double Tap Brewery, but it's pouring. There's a bunch on the carpet.
Oh, Jesus. We have our first party foul of the evening.
I didn't know you were from Alaska. That's awesome. I've never been.
Yeah. How long did you live in Alaska? Were you just like a kid when you lived there, or did you like grow up most of your adult years there?
Yeah, I was born and raised there. I'm still in and out of the place. My family's there. I spent a good part of last year up there.
That's awesome. And I'm not familiar with the Alaska geography at all? So, like, if you were to describe where the Kus-ko-kwim River is that like northern, eastern, western Alaska?
Western Alaska.
It does, but I want some understanding here. Like, what is it near? Like, what would people, you know, what would they know as far as like a landmark that would be close by?
Where would they associate it? It's out there. It's a town called Bethel, which it's 400 miles west of Anchorage. You got to fly in to get there. The Kus-ko-kwim River it's about 800 miles in length, starting in the Denali mountain range. So the headwaters would be near where Denali is, and then it floats all the way to the ocean, to the Bering Sea.
I feel like Alaska's where they all say they're going to go when shit hits the fan. That's where most Americans say they're going to go. When shit hits the fan, like Alaska's the place.
if we have like a shit hits the fan moment, would you head to Alaska? Is that where you would go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty comfortable where I'm at. You know, I'm in a plush place for wild food, and I'm right on the ocean, and the mountains are right there. So it's where am I? Well, Alaska is great for subsistence life, and I think a lot of people are there because they want to get away from everything.
How is so you're in Washington State now? How does that compare to Alaska? I mean, I think most people are just basically like, oh, that's all Northwest, right? But I would imagine it's pretty different, right?
It has its parallels. You know, a lot of people from Alaska come down to Washington for just a little milder weather. And a lot of people from Washington or the States, there's the romantic ideology of Alaska, right? It's the last frontier. There's something in all our bones that we want to be in the wilderness, and there's still that idea and the availability in Alaska.
That's interesting. You also said like you're where there's a lot of wild food, and Matt has been for a few years now talking about food forests. He wants to create a food forest, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
he's very into it.
Wild edibles. It's tough though, right? Because I would imagine Washington's a little bit more like a little better for it, because Alaska is in pretty much a state of winter for like most of the year, right?
Is Washington?
It doesn't matter where you are in the world. You can find wild edibles. In New Jersey, you're gonna find wild edibles. You go to the Pine Barrens, you're gonna find wild edibles. The thing with Alaska is, and the northern climate, you think about what the diet type would be of the people that have always lived there, and it's going to be more animal protein base, where for those 3 or 4 months you're going to get an insane amount of green vegetables and berries. I mean people traditionally would put berries in bear fat or seal oil and preserve them throughout the winter. So it's where are you in the world in contrast to what foods there are, and then learning and knowing how to preserve.
That's totally your alley. That's like
I was just thinking you might have a little bit of a culture shock if you had to go that angle.
Yes. I could do food. Isn't there some person who does food forests in New Jersey?
Well, no, in New Jersey. I'm talking about the Alaska.
No, I am
like seal oil. No, hunting moose and elk, and
I am a love nature, hug a tree, but ever since the whole tick thing and Lyme disease has come out, I'm like, I'll just stay on my lawn and no, don't go running in the forest. But I want to. I really do. But all of our kids we've had the bullseye rashes. We've had so much, and it makes me sad because I like to hug trees and
you hug the tree, but then you spend
and I run away.
And you spend an hour making sure you don't have any ticks on you.
Yeah. I mean that's pretty much it. They're everywhere.
No ticks in the West.
Hey, check that out.
Yet.
Yeah. No.
There's some in Washington, more on the east side of the Cascades, but Alaska, for the most part, don't have ticks.
I would imagine they get a good enough of a winter where it kills off a lot of that stuff. The only thing you got to worry about mosquitoes, right? Like there's tons of mosquitoes though, right?
They'll carry your kids away.
Yeah.
Wow.
The size of small house cats. Yeah.
Like the rats in New York City.
It's the state bird. The mosquito's a state bird in Alaska.
Yeah.
That's
All right.
funny.
So let's get down to business. Dealer's choice here.
I don't want a dealer's choice.
Well, it's Mother's Day, so you get to choose, right?
About what?
Do you want to talk about Rolfing first, or do you want to talk about wilderness rites of passage first? 'Cause
Oh,
I
I'm
think those are the
so
two things
excited
thinking.
about wilderness rites of passage. It sounds so awesome, and I want to go there.
Okay.
I mean, I like Rolfing too.
Okay. So, what's your first question about
Well,
wilderness rites of passage?
I don't want to ask questions today.
Are you gonna?
It's Mother's Day.
You should ask Nicholas if you have to go out into the wilderness and club
You
a baby
probably
seal in
do.
order to be part
Yeah,
of
no,
the
just
wilderness
say-
rites of passage.
Just tell us a little bit about it, about what you do with that.
Yeah, how about I break it down a little bit of what rites of passage are and go from
Yeah.
there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because it's such in our culture, it's such a term that it doesn't have any weight to it.
Hmm.
So the definition of a rites of passage is a transition between a life stage. And that could be broken up in all sorts of parts of our life. The two transitions that every human goes through is birth and death. Yeah, we'll simplify it and say birth and death.
Yeah.
And then there are major transitions throughout one's life. So adolescence to adulthood, could be adulthood to parents. It could be transitioning to elderhood. Then there's places where you can consider if you were to lose a parent or lose a child, that could be a rite of passage into that part of the life. But traditionally, and for the sake of not having a 5-6 hour conversation, I'll really talk about the basic major transitions. And that is adolescence to adulthood. Traditionally, throughout the world, it doesn't matter what culture you look at, there was some sort of rite of passage that would mark the transition of adolescence entering adulthood. At some point in the Western culture, that has stopped. There's still it's so ingrained in the human nature that we still are going to do stuff. And I could talk a little bit how that shows up in the shadow aspects or the what it looks like when somebody doesn't go through a marking of transition. But we still have a little bit of like graduation from high school. You turn 16, you get a drive, 21, drink, bar mitzvah. It's just, it doesn't have any actual weight that you get a soul-centric knowing that you are in a new part of your life.
Yeah, we get cheap commercial versions.
Or and it's not like honored, right? Like when I think of it, my question here would be like, well, because when I think of it, I think of for women, it's that maiden mother crone, right? Like that, those would be like those transitions for a woman. But is it different? Do you like how you would look at rite of passage for a woman as for a man?
Yeah, and I fairly intentionally don't talk too much about the woman side of it because I don't hold that polarity. It doesn't feel like I can honor it without really knowing. But I can say that there is a difference, especially with boys, because for girls, there is a physical shift that happens in menstruation. Whether that is honored or not is something different. Traditionally, that's going to be a time when all the mothers, all the crones, all the elder women would take that individual into a sacred space and honor that transition. Right? Like the most beautiful thing you can think of would happen. they would mark that girl as a young woman
Yeah.
and hold space for them. Now, my understanding is it's not like that for most girls. So for boys, they don't have that physical marking, at least without having some sort of ceremony that holds the space for them to be acknowledged in that transition. And
Yeah. I would imagine that's a big, I can just say for myself, like I never really had a welcoming into manhood, right? Like I grew up in a family where, so like my father and my brother and my half brothers, some of them were hunters and spent some time in the wilderness, and I did some camp outs and stuff like that. But there was never like an official welcoming, right? And I can imagine there's a major, mental and spiritual trigger that happens for a boy or a young man when they go through that process, because it then becomes an official kind of like, point on the timeline, right? Like it becomes an actual memory in their life that's now kind of like that division between the one phase and the next phase.
Yeah, and it feels spiritual too.
Yeah.
Like when I think of it, I think of American Indian because they had so many rites of passage for those different stages.
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So in terms of you getting involved in these kind of like wilderness rites of passage, where does that really originate from for you? Is it more of a kind of like American Indian, ethos, or does it come from some other kind of like spiritual or cultural background?
so the practice that I was taught and trained in comes from the lineage of the School Lost Borders. School Lost Borders was founded by the late Stephen Foster and his wife Meredith Little, and they created a pan-cultural rite of passage. So the intention was that they can hold all the cultures within it. It doesn't have dogma. It doesn't have this is the way it is. It's we're going to create what we call ceremony that holds all the aspects of what a rite of passage can be. Now they did draw on different cultures, and they had many different teachers, but the base of the teacher is a pan-cultural teaching.
I love the name School of Lost Borders. Like, what a cool fucking name.
No, we were just talking before. Like,
what a cool name.
We were just talking before about how, and again, borders might not be intended this way, but I'm just thinking like we were talking before about like, state borders and national borders and things like that being arbitrary kind of lines in the sand.
Oh,
right?
we were, yeah.
Yeah, but I actually find those kind of like demarcations within kind of a lifespan, or those events within someone's life, those actually signify something more significant to me than, say, a random, GPS location that you're now in one nation versus another, right? I love that aspect of it, but I completely bulldozed your conversation about loving the name.
I just love the name. It's such a cool name.
Yes,
and I was this idea of rites of passage is I feel like it's something we've been missing for so long, and we try. And like, so just going back to a woman or becoming a woman with your menstrual cycle, instead we're handed birth control pills, or we're given something so you don't have to have your period. What is that? Right. It's like, and it's so, and the other day, I'm not even going to go there, but the other day we were looking up, like how I was looking up about the menstrual cycle and how many women are turned off. And that's like the blood that begins like that rite of passage. And so many people are like, we are so turned off and grossed out and like.
That was a random diatribe.
But like instead of it being this beautiful honoring of like, you're in a new place and this is a new you.
Yeah.
it becomes whatever just happened is disgusting and gross, so let's get rid of it.
Yeah.
That's what it becomes.
Well, so yes, yeah, it's Mother's Day. I'll humor you.
I'm
but,
serious.
but so yes, all of that. But so School Lost Borders. So is that something that you went through, or is that just kind of like the inspiration for, you know, what you're doing now?
They hold various programs, various Vision Fast, various trainings.
Mm.
And over the course of, I mean, I would say it's probably 4 or 5 years, I was traveling throughout the West, working with various organizations, assisting what we call Vision Fast, where we take people out to go through a rite of passage.
Mm.
And School Lost Borders was one of those places that I both would go through and sit in ceremony, sit on and fast in the wilderness, as well as help learn how to guide.
When you say fast, is that like Yellowstone?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Have
Yeah.
you seen Yellowstone?
No, I haven't seen Yellowstone, but I'm familiar that there's a show called Yellowstone.
They have this moment where the one guy goes out for 4 days and sits in the woods and he fasts. And he's like within these protective. Why are you laughing at me?
Well, it's probably a fictionalized version
But it
of
is kinda like
something
it's a
similar
fast.
to what you've experienced.
It's a vision quest.
Well, I could break down more of what a rite of passage looks like, and you know, I use some terms synonymously,
Mhm.
but because I forget that everyone's not in the world that I'm in. But I can break down a little more logistically what a rite of passage would look like and how I hold it as well. If that's
Yeah. So like, if a boy or young man comes to you, or their, you know, parents are basically wanting them to kind of go through this process, what does that look like? Where, you know, are there different options, or is it a very similar process for each one? Like, how does that work?
So I'll backtrack some hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And say these ceremonies, which I'm saying ceremony in place of rite of passage, was so important to the culture. And I'll break it down a little bit so we can see it in today's culture, why it's so important. I get a kick out of it. So they knew how important these ceremonies were, that they were willing to risk the lives of their youth to go through them.
Mm.
And I don't mean that I don't mean that metaphorically, figuratively. I mean that literally. Every year during one of these rites of passage, they'd be people that would die. They wouldn't necessarily make it through, or they would go through and they wouldn't have that shift that they're entering adulthood.
Mm.
And they would become a liability to the village as a collective unit, that maybe they would get another year to mature, or they might be asked to leave the village, the community in general. So why this was so important is that if at that certain age, because if you think about psychologically what's going on through those adolescent years, it's the first, 6-7 years, it's about learning who I am.
Mm.
It's creating the initial ego, realizing that life is finite, learning about death, exploring through that lens, getting to the point where it's time to serve the community. Everyone in this world has some specific gifts to them. We're not just this random human being in this life. We have a specific task or gifts that we're given to bring to the world.
Mm.
And if we don't start living into those, we run the risk of harming the collective whole. So at that time, and generally it's the time when, and adolescent starts seeing the opposite or starts falling in love with another person.
Mm.
That's kind of this time when traditionally, it's a little different nowadays, but that's traditionally when they would go through it. So what would happen is if they didn't psychologically have the shift into adolescence, they would stay as a immature adult.
Mm.
Think about it as an adult walking around with the adolescent psyche.
We have an entire generation of those right now. Yeah.
Our culture is adults with adolescent psyches. We're run by our country's run by them too.
Mm.
Yes.
And we can see what that does because they're more drawn to the materialistic world, to extracting versus creating. And like you mentioned with a food forest is tending to what is already there. It's bringing beauty. It's bringing connection. It's yeah, I'm going to eat the food, but I'm also going to make sure that those trees are tended to in a way that they're going to thrive. And that's what happens through these transitions is I'm stepping from this stage of it's important for me to learn about my own identity to then stepping into a place of tending to the community. I'm no longer this individual. I'm now a member of the community and I'm contributing it in a productive way.
We are missing that.
Well, the other way I would imagine you could also look at it is as opposed to having a community of followers, right? Literally being a community or a tribe of leaders where each individual is empowered to lead in a certain way. Whereas I think nowadays, and I don't want to derail you talking about this, but we definitely seem to have an issue with people that look to others to lead, and they constantly cede that leadership to others when really they should be taking that upon themselves. They just don't know how because they haven't been brought up in that way.
It's stepping into our own power, embodiment, and it's a scary thing, right? It's all of a sudden taking why things aren't working for you, because I could blame this person or that organization, and when I really take responsibility, there's no one to blame but myself.
See, and I'm thinking about all the people that just blindly listen to the CDC or blindly listen to the doctor or blindly.
You could take any example of that. I mean,
we were talking about that today. So
we can get deeper into that later on if we want to. But I mean, like that's more of a political avenue because they're deferring to people that they see as leaders. But even those individuals haven't necessarily, like if they've gone through these rites of passage, they might not even be rites of passage to become a leader or a productive member of the tribe. They've gone through a rite of passage that has to do with consolidating power or, being someone who ascribes to, some other school of thought. But so from that background, it sounds like now, are you mostly providing this kind of rite of passage for young men, or do you also see adult men coming to you and saying, hey, I've never had this in my life before?
Right now I've been in an avenue. I just moved to Washington, so I'm not guiding. I don't think I'm going to guide this year, but coming the next year, I'm going to start doing trips again. I personally prefer to work with adults.
Okay.
So and I'll also finish the tangent or the thread around what it looks like.
Sure.
But I personally prefer to work with adults, and I'll guide both. I'll guide anyone. It doesn't matter as at an adult level. If it's adolescence, I'll only do boy rite of passage, young man rite of passage. And that I do with a group of other people through other organizations. There's a place in Oregon called Cascadia Quest. there's a place on Vashon Island called Journeymen, and you really need a community to hold young adolescents entering young adulthood. It can't just be a couple people, in my opinion. You have to bring their parents in, their friends in. It becomes a collective program trip.
I love that.
That's awesome.
And so with adults, it's a little bit different. And I'm currently starting to create. My intention in the next coming years is to create a program for adults to come and go through their own experience, and at the same time create a rite of passage for their own community to bring back to their community. So it's, I could only guide so much, but I could help and teach people to hold these ceremonies and bring it back to their community in a way that it's going to be helpful for them, because it's so personal to the individual community and where they are.
So when people come to you as adults and say they want to do a rite of passage, are they looking to have the rite of passage that they never had from like boy or like through that adolescence? Or are they usually coming through like, okay, I want to do a rite of passage because my parents just died? Or are they looking back? You understand what I'm saying? Like, are they looking back or are they going forward?
What I often find is there tends to be a thread where I see it with men in their mid to late 20s, upwards of early 40s, will be called to one of these. Generally, it's vision fast form. So what that looks like is, at the base of it, it's 4 days fasting from food,
Yellowstone.
community and shelter. Yeah, it sounds maybe similar, but it's held in a community aspect.
Yeah.
So they separate from everything, go out in the wilderness, metaphorically naked from everything besides water, maybe some rattles and what have you, and they sit in solitude for those days. Now, oftentimes somebody is drawn to that and they don't know why. They show up and they realize they didn't get to experience that at the appropriate time in their life, and that turns into why they're there, is to mark that transition at adolescence to adulthood. I also see a lot of people come for grief. Grief is a really, really common theme for people to come. They might have lost a parent, spouse is a common theme as well. They come to sit on the land and grieve and say their goodbyes and say the things that they might have not been able to say when that person was alive. I see people want to have kids and they struggle with kids, will come out sometimes and sit in ceremony and pray and ask what needs to happen to bring their child into the world. One that I'm fond of, and I'm going to be helping with Meredith and another guide, Angelo Lazanki. It's called the ball cord initiation, and it's specifically around death. So for a year, if not multiple years, somebody will prepare themselves for dying, whether it's everyone holds it differently. Why they're doing it is individual to their own being. But the intention is that I am going to prepare myself so I can be ready to die and release everything that is no longer serving me. And then I can step into what it is that I am ready to step into.
That is
100% get that.
That is absolutely incredible, because we've spoken about before how the mystics and the Gnostics, like the Greeks and the predecessors to the Greeks, literally said that you can't live unless you've essentially experienced or thought about your own death, like in depth, right? That's absolutely incredible, because I mean, I think a lot of people live with a lot of fear in their lives,
fear of dying,
and that fear of death is pretty much the ultimate. And if you can conquer that by saying, yeah, I've been there, done that, that's incredible. That's absolutely incredible.
And I would tweak that just a little bit, and instead of saying conquer, I would say become in relationship with death.
Yes. Yeah.
Because there's no
you're not, like,
conquering.
putting your flag in it.
There's no conquering death.
Yeah.
That's what we try to do, but when we avoid it.
Yeah.
It's an anti-aging movement. It's we got to become in relationship and build. We put the metaphor I say is, or the practice that I love is, and I've heard Greek people in Greek cultures, modern cultures say this is some version, but it's, what does it look like to put a chair and a meal at your table every night for death to come in the door? Because you don't know when death is going to rise. And when death shows up, what if you have a chair at the table and a meal ready for them? How might that shift how you interact with death in your day-to-day practice?
And just how, and when death doesn't show up, that next morning is euphoric, right? Like, oh, he didn't show up last night. Like, I get another day. Like, that's amazing. Like, that's incredible. I think a lot of people would think that that's actually, people at the face of it might think that that's depressing. Like, oh my God, you're always thinking that you might die at any moment in time. But really, I mean, to a certain extent, it's freeing, because you're no longer just kind of like, counting minutes. Like, you're actually living those minutes, because dinner might be your last, right? Like, I mean, that's absolutely incredible.
I feel that the whole grief thing too, because so I lost my parents, and since then I've had to, in my own like shamanic studies, I've been working with like embracing the word orphan. Like, okay, but in a really beautiful way. Like, okay, so I get to redefine everything, right? I get to jump in. And through that whole process, I've also shed this fear of dying. Like, there's something different there. I need a rite of passage. But like there's, because now for me, so when you lose your parents, and I'm an only child, so I am now the oldest of my family. I'm like the elder. That's a totally new role for me. Like, and it brings on a whole new, sphere of living. And it's not that it's bad, and it's not that it's good, but it's like to honor that, so it's very cool.
We call that stepping into the matriarchy. or use the word crone earlier.
Crone. Heck yeah. My daughter would say hag, but I've gotten her. There will be no more hag in our house. It's now crone.
It's not allowed. Yeah. So is that the only form it takes? It's essentially a fast and an individual journey, or at least it sounds like you're also doing it as a collective, but ultimately the journey is taking it individually. Does it always just take that form, or is there anything else that goes along with it?
That's how I hold it now. Okay. Throughout it, so this is a practice people can go and do themselves. Ceremony is all ceremony is a marking in the ground that's saying you're stepping into a different way of being. So you make a threshold, you draw a line in the sand, and you step across it, marking that I am entering into a different dimension. I'm entering into the ceremonial realm. That's all ceremony is. And then the willingness to be in that place. It's, I think for a lot of people, it might be hard to conceptualize. But if you're willing to fully allow whatever is present to show up, you can have a really profound experience. And then making sure you step back over the threshold and embody those lessons that were learned.
Mm.
That's this most simple version. So throughout the world, there's all sorts of different rites of passage. You know, there's fasting is one version of it, but sitting in darkness, plant ceremony, plant medicine, breath work, dance. There's so many different ways of going about it. It's, the way I see it and the way I experience it is that every one of us at some point in our lineage had a land-based rite of passage that was held for our ancestors.
Hmm.
At some point, for whatever reason, it became too dangerous to hold those. Most likely, a group of people came in, said, if you practice what you're doing, we're going to kill you.
Mm.
That's across witch trials. We see it in North America with Native Americans. It's across the world. There was some version of that. And what happened is, you can think of these practices as dying, but they went back into the earth. They went into a different place and went dormant. They were seeds that were planted in the ground, waiting until the soils were fertile to then rise again. It feels like to me that those soils are becoming fertile again.
Mm.
It's finally starting to be safe enough to speak about these ceremonies, these rites of passages. I mean, my lineage is definitely witch trial based, and I personally hold trauma and I hold the stories of that. And I know that there are times when I don't talk about what I'm talking about because it can be charging. It holds a certain charge to it. But at the same time, there's so many things that are coming forth in our world right now to get people to open up their awareness and shift their perspectives of how they're living life. And this is one of those things. So how it's done throughout the world is different. And that's why I will start training people to hold them for their own communities so they can listen to what is needed. It might be in an urban environment that people need to go and do aesthetic dancing for 8 hours. Who am I to say what their version of this is?
Mm.
For me, I hold it in the form of wilderness-based fasting. That's what I was taught, and I love it. I mean, that's my passion.
I feel like you do need to watch Yellowstone. It is that though. It's like 4 days, like really naked, nothing, right? Like I feel like that's what it is.
Well,
except
yeah.
for the bear skin.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, for him, it's not necessarily a rite of passage.
It's a vision quest.
It's more of
But
a
it's
vision
death.
quest. But
It's death.
yeah, it's facing death. It's someone who is without direction and he's looking for direction. And he wants the earth or the spirits of the earth to help him, or at least give him a vision, right? Like, and calls in his ancestors as well to like help him with that.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's for a piece of fiction, it's actually somewhat profound, in terms of what's included in it. But I love the aspect of bringing it back to your own community, because at the end of the day, if you're helping one or a couple of people at a time, that's incredible. It's very powerful, right? But at the same time, like you said, I mean, we have generations of people that have been without these kinds of rites of passage. I mean,
well, you can look just at the amount of women who are missing the circle of women. Women have always come together in circles.
Well, yeah, on both sides. Yeah.
Like, so I look at it from my, right, and you look at it from them, but like even just that women crave it. On every Facebook group I'm in with women, they crave the presence of each other. But our lives are so busy and there's so much going on and there's so much pressure all the time that no one feels like they can allow for that time. And it's not held in the importance of other things like money or, work or whatever it be. But so I just talking about the witch wound, I'm going to totally go back to in a minute. Just talking about the witch wound, I actually did a human design healing your witch wound. Sarah, it was like 6 months, and it was like a ceremony almost. It happened every moon, every full moon, every new moon, and it was in this like gathering of women, and we got to work with human design as well as ceremony, and it was stretched out over 6 months, but it really was awakening and healing, like awakening to the witch self, healing the witch wound, and there were like 100 to 150 women, but like you got to know so many of them because even though it was on Zoom, which is like ridiculous, you still got to know these women and you were kind of working through this wound that everybody there had. You talk about the whole witch trials and what happened to it. I mean, even let go of like Salem stuff, the stuff that happened in Ireland and all over the place with women and children and different forms of Catholicism, Christianity. I shouldn't say Catholicism, Christianity.
Well, no, I mean all of the above. But
yeah.
So in your background, you have family members or ancestors that were basically involved in or directly affected by that. I don't even know how to put it. Hysteria.
I don't know the direct lineage of it. It's having European lineage. That was such a wound on everybody everybody from Europe during that time, or that came over in the East Coast.
Yeah.
So do you believe in like reincarnation?
That's a conversation. That's a conversation. I don't know. I don't know if I can go all the way there right now. There's a cycle of life that is continuous. Whether you want to look at it in the term of reincarnation, or that your body turns to soil, turns to worm, turns to the robin, turns to the cat. There is a continuous cycle of life that is always happening. And the idea that it's lights out at the end of the human experience feels very limited to me.
Yeah. Oh, I just mentioned it because talking about witch wounds too, like if you're really called to that could be soul ancestry. It could be past lives. It could be, soul family. You just never know.
Well, I think what I also like about the rites of passage process, or at least just kind of the ethos of it is that going through those cycles of life, right? Those multiple generations. That also means that, I mean, we've talked about this before, and you said, at some point in time, we lost those things ancestrally. But the beauty is that if you find it again, right, if it sprouts again, it now sprouts not just for you, but it sprouts for the generations that follow you, right? And so,
like digging it back up.
This conversation is super timely because I was having, if you're familiar with the phraseology, like I was having a very black pill kind of day. I was like, how do you deal with these kind of like insurmountable, I would call them very like negative, if not evil things that we're dealing with in the world right now. I would say this is most definitely at least some like a potential solution, not the solution, but like a piece of it, because I mean, we literally have tons of people that are walking around the planet right now, and they've never gotten past the adolescent stage. And so you're depending on adolescence to find maturity, right? Like you're depending on adolescence to find some kind of learned perspective or experience, and they don't have the tools. They haven't gone through the process, you know. And I can speak personally, like I think for a large portion of my life I've been a grown man child. Like, I mean, that's basically what I've gone through, because I never had that rite of passage, right? Like I never I mean, there's been moments in time where like I've, you know, everyone says, oh, well, like I had those moments when I was a kid where I like faced death or whatever, but not really. I mean, like there were moments and times where like you were in danger of getting hurt, or maybe even you did get injured, but there's never really been one of those, like, you know, in the woods alone, what are you going to do now kind of situations. I think a lot of people would learn a lot about themselves if they found themselves in those situations. Wait, what are some of the stories of people that you get that, or either that you've been alongside or that you've known that have gone through this process? Like, you know, what do they typically say coming out the other end?
It's so it's so individual to the person and where they are in their life. A very common theme is a sense of belonging, which is, it's almost ironic that you go into being as alone as you possibly can,
Yeah.
In order to
and
feel
you find belonging.
yeah.
And to me, I feel like it has to do with how much distraction is in everyone's life, right? You're constantly distracted, whether it's your phone, a book, just the day-to-day tasks, that to sit and actually sit in solitude and find connection to the land that you're standing on, find connection to possibly your ancestry, parts of yourself that you became unfamiliar with, to let go. It's profound. And you know, I guess I'll speak more in my own terms of experience, but you know, one thing that I really notice is there. How do I word this? There is, the psyche doesn't understand the difference between day-to-day life and ceremonial life. And what can happen is, in these spaces, you can have conversations with people and your psyche believes that those conversations are happening. When your psyche believes something is shifting, stuff happens on the physical realm. So if you lost somebody, or there's a tough conversation that you need to have, you can go into these spaces and you can have those conversations. Not to negate or say that work doesn't have to happen when you leave, because it absolutely does. Integration, nothing matters without the integration piece. Otherwise, you're just going to get higher, if you will. You're going to these spaces for the cathartic experience. But there is some immense shifts that happen. And, you know, just in my own life, the amount of work I've done in these spaces and how I've noticed shifts happen in my own family is pretty profound. And I don't want to say that it's just me and doing this work. You know, it's my family is doing their own stuff as well. But I feel like my relationship with my folks and my family has never been better, based on how much I've done on myself. And oftentimes that comes from these spaces.
That's incredible. Yeah, the power there. I think a lot of people assume that they need someone else to guide them to that place, when that might be true, but I think they keep trying to find someone else, like literally someone in the physical realm, right? Like that's guiding them there. When truthfully, maybe they just need someone like yourself that's holding space for what really will help them, which is ultimately themselves, but then also those elements of life that I think some people might be skeptical of, but are, you know, a component of the spiritual realm. Because I mean, like, when you speak of the ceremonial mind, like legitimately thinking or knowing that something happened, like a conversation or an experience, I mean, to me, that makes me think of the spiritual realm at least kind of touching, right, like the physical realm, right, like, or at least kind of blending with it. We actually have someone coming up in the future who's going to be talking about kind of like portals and stuff like that in terms
Yeah,
of,
you mentioned the Pine Barrens. That's like a scary place in New Jersey.
well, you know, that's actually a really good
Not
question.
the people, but
The places that you choose in
Yeah.
terms of where this happens, are they of significance? Is it just kind of random, or, you know,
or is it like the Sedona like vortexes?
yeah, is it just something where, like, kind of you're out on your own and you can just feel that a place is of significance, or is it literally just something that kind of manifests wherever and it's just a mechanism of the actual ceremony?
I say that the ceremony knows where it wants to be. Yeah. Whether, you know, is anything really random, I don't know. But, you know, places like Sedona, like, you know, Yosemite, whatever, there's a particular reason they're so attractive and people are drawn to them. And I think there's a lot of potency in those places. For me, I have a relationship to the places that I hold these ceremonies with. I've, for the most part, spent some time there, fasted on the land myself, cultivated, and know that that place wants this to happen. It's you know, I'm guiding people, but really I'm just walking people to a doorway and having them go out to the wilderness. And that is the real teacher. It's not me. It's that person by themselves in the wilderness, in nature. That's where the work happens. That's where the teaching happens. It's not really me.
I have 3 things, and I think I forgot already one of them. but first of all, we were talking almost 2 weeks now about grounding on the show.
Yeah.
And so being out in nature, like, that's alone the grounding. Like that alone is bringing you into like energy of the earth, right? So like that in and of itself is healing, let alone all the rest. Right. But I was thinking about, and for anyone who wants to, like, go barefoot. And I don't go barefoot in forests because of ticks, but I do. We have the tick tackler at our house, so I can go out and I can stand in our yard. That's why we have grounding sheets.
Yeah.
So grounding, like spending some time sitting out in nature just alone, and I imagine being on the earth for 4 days straight without leaving must absolutely like affect, you know, just your being on the energy of the earth. Because even if we're on the sheet, we're only on the sheet at night. You're doing 4 straight days. That's like amazing. The other piece I was thinking is people could do it on their own, but so I come from the therapy solar world, and the idea of being witnessed or brought into and out of is like, there is a value in that. There's a value to someone else walking you to that door, or even witnessing for, I don't know if you stay there for the 4 days, but if you like even witnessing pieces of that there, you know, there's a huge value in that. So even if people want, I could see the value of going with a guide, even if you're capable of doing it on your own and say you've done it. It's just like doing, you know, we're talking like mushrooms with somebody.
Psychedelics,
yeah, psychedelics. Like that's more of a safety thing, but but also being guided across that journey. There's so much value just to be witnessed, to be heard and echoed back, and so that is interesting to me.
Actually, that's a good question. So mechanically, when you're bringing people out into nature and they're taking this journey or going through this ceremony, are you with them the entire time, like, or are you kind of just giving them some best practices and stuff ahead of time? You get them to the spot and then you kind of leave them be. I mean, how does that kind of mechanically work out?
The way it works is either held over 9 or 12 days.
Mm.
It's broken up into 333 or 444. And what it is the first 4 days is setting up the intention. Why do you think you're here? What are you going out onto the land with? What is everything going to look like? Finding your spot. What spot calls to you? Spending some time there, creating a threshold, creating clarity again. It's coming to why do you think you're there? Let's get that intention into a single or multiple sentence statement that you can take out on the land. Not to say it won't shift, because it probably will, but it's an anchor for your time out there. After 3 or 4 days, we create a threshold for everyone to cross into, and it's a the community is a major part of it.
Mhm.
We're holding each other. Myself, co-guides, assistants, we're holding the hearth, if you will, but everybody that is fasting is holding each other together. We tend to have a buddy system. So what that looks like is each person is partnered up, and they will create a rock pile. So one person in the morning puts a rock in maybe a circle. In the evening, the other person puts a rock. In the morning, they take it out. In the evening, they take it out. Make sure that your buddy's okay. If the rock's not there, then they come to me, which we have some sort of medical training, or I'm wilderness first responder, so I know at least the basics of what to do if there is an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a man or a bear. Sorry, just kidding. Sorry to interrupt.
And after the time, we call them back, bring them across the threshold, and they have time to share their story. It's a story that is sacred. It's only told in that way one time. We have a process of reflecting back what we hear, not telling them anything. Just, we hear you. This is your experience, which is oftentimes a major difference between if you were to go out by yourself and if you were to be held in a group, is that you're being witnessed, like you said, in your experience. Because in our culture, when you go through one of these experiences, whether it is psychedelics, whether it is a vision fast, whether it's time in darkness, when you bring back these stories and you try to relay them to somebody that hasn't experienced or has no framework for it, it's one of the most deflating things you can experience.
You're trying to this is why, you're just explaining yourself.
You're so excited. You're so excited. Like, you went through this life-changing experience, and all you see is eyes glaze over and somebody say, you want to go get a sandwich? Or like, that's great. Did you see the basketball game yesterday?
Yeah. Yeah. It's you're relaying to them what the surface of Mars looks like, and they have no possible way of even comprehending what you're saying. Like, they to them, they don't even know Mars exists, right? Like, exactly. To a certain extent. I can imagine that's extremely helpful, because, and doing this as a group too, I think is extremely helpful as well, because especially with men, you're creating essentially a brotherhood, right? Like, it's a shared experience amongst men where you're creating a tribe. If it's only a tribe that exists for that 12 days or whatever, it existed for that 12 days, and not only did it exist for that 12 days, but that 12 days also exists in history forever from there on out, which is also amazing. Is that the end of the process, or is there kind of a download or like an easing back into regular life after that?
It really depends who you're with. With me, it's a little more abrupt. I really like the being in complete wilderness and then they go out on their own way.
Yeah.
I am working on a system to create more of an integration because that's where the work really begins, is when you leave that place and you integrate it into your life. Stephen Foster, they used to do a lot of work on Death Valley. That's where they would hold their vision fasts. And he would take people into Vegas right afterwards.
Oh,
They would go to Chinese buffet. And he was a real trickster. He was a brilliant individual. But he wanted to showcase, the modern culture to be just in your face.
Oh.
You just spent 4 days in the most profound experience of your life, and then you go straight to a Chinese buffet in Vegas. Like,
oh my God,
that's what he wanted. That. So it's everyone's different.
So one of the things that, I know what I was thinking of before, but this is, I have two things now. But one of the things I was thinking was, so I work in the Akashic Records, and you can go on in the Akashic Records of land. So it would be really cool to like go into the Akashic Records of a place where you've done a lot of these journeys, like or if you're going to go do it somewhere where you don't know, you can actually go into the records of the land and you can like set your space up. You can make friends with it first. Like that's pretty cool. I was just thinking in my head how cool that would be, because I've worked with the Akashic Records of where our house is, and like there was a lot of history here that I had to like make do with. We had to make peace. I was saging the whole. But my other thing reminds me a little, when you say about that like culture shock, it reminds me a little of Vipassana, where have you heard of the Vipassana meditation where I think I'm saying it right. Am I saying it right?
I think so.
Vipassana.
I'm not sure.
Where you go for 10 days and you don't say a word.
Vipassana.
There you go. Say that again.
Vipassana or Vipassana.
Vipassana. It reminds me a little bit like when you talk about like that culture shock, where you go and you don't
hear your own voice.
You don't hear your own voice for 10 days. And there's like, you have to do yoga and classes, and you and there's like it's strict, right?
You meditate for 10 days, anywhere, something like 14 hours a day. Yeah, no eye contact, no talking.
Wow.
I was like, I need a break from parenting. And
did you think about doing that?
Are you kidding? I sent out an application.
Oh, really?
Didn't get it.
I didn't even know.
Well, it's free too.
Yeah.
You can, but you can't. You gotta like, and that idea of that culture shock. I have friends who've done it, and they like, but going to like a Chinese buffet afterwards, I don't even know how that would be such a culture shock. I don't know if that's also not necessarily a rite of passage, but it's.
Well, no, I mean, that's not necessarily part of the rite of passage. I think that's.
I'm just thinking the culture shock.
But I hear a lot of people that are searching for some experience will go and sit through a Vipassana. I mean, it holds something sacred. I mean, you're going into your own depths for 10 days. And I've sat through a couple, and stuff comes up. It's not easy for most people. It's a challenge.
Could you imagine?
This is a random thought, but like a couple of weeks ago, there was like a big deal about people that don't have an internal monologue. Did you hear about this? Like people.
That would be easy for someone without an internal.
It seemed unthinkable to most, because I think most people do. Like when you sit there in silence,
Your mind
you can hear your own voice in your head, right? Apparently, there's a phenomenon where a greater than 0% of people literally do not have an internal voice.
They're born in the present moment.
I guess. I mean, like, I don't think when they think to themselves, they don't think in words. Like it's a much different life experience, right? And what's funny is I've never thought to ask anyone that I've ever met whether or not they have an internal monologue,
But you told me, when you told me about that, you said the percentage was much higher than 0.
Well, no, I mean, like, I think the percentage is overestimated, but at the same time, like, I wonder what that I don't know if you've ever come across someone like that, but like, I can only imagine being like out in the wilderness alone and not necessarily kind of like
Having an internal
audibleizing, unless that's the way that you would compensate, is just be out in the wilderness having an audible conversation with yourself the entire time.
I know people who would do that.
Yeah. You know,
Let me ask you, when people do these journey, I mean, we have to get on to Rolfing too, because I've always
Okay.
been a fan of that, but I don't even know that much about it. But my mom was a Feldenkrais practitioner, and we were talking. But the do people generally like journal through the days, or did they do any kind of expression, or is it really just kind of like being in the present moment in the wild?
Everyone's different. Some people are journalers. Other people, I'm not much of a journaler myself. For me, it's a lot of, I wander. I'm a wanderer. Throughout the day. I walk and talk and just observe, and usually find some pretty cool stuff, and some wild stuff tends to happen.
So the people that go through this, are they set up with, say, like a tent or a campsite, or I mean, are they out experiencing the elements by themselves for 4 days? Like, how does that work?
So we don't make rules.
Okay.
We call them taboos. So the taboo is you're going to go without food, you're going to go without shelter, and you're going to go without company. You're going to go naked into the wilderness for those days.
Like naked and alone.
Now we live in a culture where sometimes people need to break rules.
Mm-hmm.
And the rule that they might, or people are really hard on themselves. And sometimes people need to break that taboo, put up a tent, cook an amazing meal from themselves, and kind of snicker that they're breaking the rules. I'm not going to tell you what you need to do out there.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to break your own rules. You need to get out of your head, away from that voice telling you that you need to do things that are hard.
You just got to fucking do it.
You need to put a tent up, get a pillow, and just read a book, watch a movie, whatever, like that. And it does. You can't break the ceremony. Like that becomes part of your story. Why is it that you did it? Becomes the interesting part of it. It's like it doesn't matter what you do out there. It's what you are being called to do. And if you're being called to put up a tent and take care of yourself, and you don't do it, and then that becomes part of your story, like all I wanted to do was put up a tent, but I didn't do it, it becomes part of your story. So it's so individualistic of what is needed and what's being called.
I can't explain how I love that enough, because the juxtaposition of the society that's been set up around us is such that there aren't natural consequences to things. There are arbitrary consequences, and there's arbitrary rules, right? Like, and so most people would go into this and they would say, okay, they would be just like me. They would be like, what are the rules? What are the guidelines? Where do we sleep? Where do I go to the bathroom? Like all this other stuff. And there might be answers to some of those questions, but we live in a society where in most other cases, all of those things you have to design answers for other people. And I would imagine it's a very interesting experience for someone when they come and they were like, hey, where do I go to the bathroom? And you're like, you're in nature, right? Like, now granted, there might be a bathroom, right? But that being said, like, I think a lot of people have grown accustomed. We talk about this with art all the time. Art has turned into crafts. It's not art anymore, right?
Techniques, a bunch of techniques.
Yeah, it's here's your 5 pre-prescribed shapes or whatever. You put them together in this formation and it makes this thing, right? I love the fact that it's an individualized experience, because at the end of the day, to presume that everyone is gonna get the same thing out of the experience is absolutely insane. Like, it's absolutely
You
ridiculous.
come with your whole story
Yeah, like
before.
no one lives the same pre-story, and no one's going to live the same story afterward. Why would you live the same exact
Like,
story
right, in that
while
ceremony.
you're
Why
going
would
through
you
that
be in the
ceremony?
rules, right?
That's incredible.
I was just thinking I would be a tent person.
Yep.
I was not like bugs. Like, it really is the fucking bugs. I would choose the bear over the bear, but not the bug.
Maybe that needs to be your aspect of the ceremony. You need to commune with the bugs.
No. I would be in a tent. I might not leave. No, but I think it's wonderful, and I think that's so needed, even if it's just for the feet on the earth for 4 days. Like,
Yeah.
that alone is
Circadian rhythm.
Oh, yeah.
Detox from the phone.
Right. No electricity. Like, we're just going with the moon and the sun and communing with nature and communing with those natural cycles.
Mm-hmm.
God, I feel like there's a part of me that wants to just wander, but you know me, I can't even get in the car and just drive nowhere. I got to be like, where are you going? Are you turning left?
I gotta tell you this. This is a completely random story, Nicholas, but occasionally when the kids were younger, like I'm talking like 2, 3, 4 years old, we would get in the car and we would not have a destination in mind, and I would allow them to navigate. Like, do I go right or do I go left here? It drove her absolutely nuts. Couldn't handle it, and I was like,
I want to wander.
I mean, our kids would basically just drive us around in circles. We would get almost
They'd be
nowhere.
like, right.
And you'd be like, what are we doing right now? But yeah, I think you would have an interesting experience.
I would have an
anyway.
interesting experience.
But so before we move on to other subjects, have we missed anything? What
Is
else?
there anything else you want to
What
say
else
about
is a
it?
component of these ceremonies or kind of what you're
Right,
doing
so
here that maybe we haven't touched on?
I'll just name one aspect that I think people could take, something they could take, something to do, like how to interact with this on my own, so to speak. And there is a practice called the Death Lodge. Death Lodge comes from Turtle Island, this land. And what it is a practice of, traditionally, when someone was about to die, they would have an opportunity to close all the ties they needed to have the conversations with those that they needed to. And there'd be a whole day, multiple days. It might just be for a week, 2 weeks. They would have an hour, 2 hours, whatever they chose to. People would come to them. They would have the final conversations. There is a opportunity in our ceremonies that we open up for them to have a death lodge if they choose to. Now, it doesn't have to, you don't have to go to Death Valley. You don't have to go to me to have this experience. But what can be very profound is to set up a space that you open up a death lodge for yourself. That could be 1 hour a week, 1 hour a day. It could be one day you open it and allow whoever shows up to show up. And I don't mean that someone will necessarily physically show up, but who shows up to your thoughts? Who do I need to close ties with to have a good death? And to allow those conversations to be held. And I think it's extremely important to not have these lingering conversations held in our body, that we in some way start to have them before we get to those final stages of death. Because there's so often people don't have the ability to have what you might call a good death because there's lingering conflict within us in some relationships in our life. So the invitation would be that you take a piece of paper or you open a space and you just allow whoever shows up in your mind to come and visit you, and you have a conversation. And that might be you talking to them. That might be them talking to you. That might be a combination, but to allow the process of closing those ties so you can have a good death to occur. It's simple practice. It's very profound. And I think it's extremely important that we start to work towards what it would look like to have a good death.
I think that's interesting, just from going back to what you said a while ago, just like literally putting a line in the earth, right? And with that intention, creating that death lodge. One of the things I will say, just having worked with a lot of people on their clair abilities, is like, if you do something like that, if you're more of a creative type, because being a creative type working with the, clairvoyance, for a long time, I just thought it was my imagination. That shit was just coming because I had a good imagination. And then I was like, my teacher is like, no, if it comes without, like, if it comes like that, it's not your imagination. It's actually just you seeing things. So don't second guess. Like, if people try that, like, don't say whatever comes in, just accept it.
Allow yourself to be surprised.
Right. Just move it. Like, even if you feel like it's your imagination, even if you feel like it's something that is not true, just go with it. If you only do that death lodge for like an hour, you have an hour of just moving. It's like Yes Man, but of the death lodge.
No.
Right. Yes, I'm gonna accept that.
I had a guy once who opened a death lodge. He was somebody that you were like, how did you end up here? And the only being that entered his death lodge was his dog. And he told the story, and we're like, hell yeah, like that's where you're at in your journey. Like, your dog showed up. Yes. That's what you needed. That's what you needed right now during this time. It's like you didn't have a profound experience with, God coming and touching and talking to you, or your late great great grandparents, or your future kid. It was your dog at this time. And just like, yes, that's where you're at, and allow that to come through.
Yeah. Just accepting.
Yeah.
And I it's just such beautiful work. I feel like anything that we intentionally do with ceremony, that we intentionally choose and open up and we say yes to, and we accept, if we can take our inner critic, we put it on the side for a little while. All of it. So, and it's so, if you can do something like this, the death lodge, and you talk, even talking like ungovernable in the level of looking at what's going on with politics and what's going on with our lives, if you can free yourself from the fear of death, if you can start living presently, you're not going to fucking wear a mask, nor are you going to get other fucking shit, because you're like, you know what? Like, I'm a sovereign person and I'm not afraid of this, and I can make these choices in my life.
Well, not just a mask, but also the other interpretation of the word mask.
Yeah.
Right? You're not just going to live what you feel is a pre-prescribed course for yourself, which is it's empowering. I mean, it's really empowering.
It's when you get to step out and do the cool shit.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to ask about Rolfing?
Well, you guys have to tell me more, because for some reason, I thought there was controversy around Rolfing in, like, when I was a kid in like the 70s and 80s, but I didn't see it when I looked it up. But my mother was a Feldenkrais practitioner, so she is probably the one who brought it up to me at one point or another. And I have lots of friends who work like fascial massage, somatic healing, all of that. Like, so I'm very into the body. I was a 5 rhythms dancer with Gabrielle Roth for a long time. So like, I understand it, but for some reason I can't contextually put that.
And we talked to Jem last week, who uses massage with intuitive healing as far as that goes.
If you could explain
just
it.
Reader's Digest. What is Rolfing, and how is that kind of like helpful, whether it be physically and or spiritually?
Mm-hmm. I've been sitting with trying to distill my role in this world, and what I've been sitting with is that I'm a transitional guide. I help people transition between life phases, and that could be from a state of being in pain to a state of moving in ease. And at the core of it, that's what Rolfing is. It's 10-session series to open up, reposition fascia so you're in line with gravity. It's it's one of those things that there's so many layers as well. At the core of it, I am helping you get into a posturally aligned state. And I like thinking about there's something we call the line. A line runs from the top of your head in front of your spine all the way down into the ground, and that's what holds you up. There's so many different ideas around what that is, different names for it, the chakra system, all sorts of stuff. When you get off that line, you're out of balance. When you get back into it, that's your place of power. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you into your place of power.
I've always heard that Rolfing was like, from my remembrance of it, people talked like it was powerful experience to go for Rolfing sessions. But I honestly don't. So is it manipulating the body almost like massage, or is it giving someone movements and following them with them, or?
So it's a hands-on manual therapy. We're manipulating the fascia. I would say it's can't necessarily call it massage or deep massage or myofascial release, but it's its own technique to accomplish certain goals. We have people do movement within the session. So it takes place mostly on a table or sitting upright. And we retrain the body to have the correct intrinsic movement. Throughout our life, for whatever reason, we tend to start to move in a way that, how would I put this? There is a group of muscles called the adductors, adduction, which it's the movement of going out to closer to your body. Those muscles are the ones in your legs, your inner thighs, have a tendency of overworking. So when you're walking forward, they shouldn't be activated. But they are these go-getter, I'm gonna accomplish the task at hand. That's not my task. So we remind them what their role is. And that's through pinning them or doing various techniques, including movement, to bring them back into this position. We also do stuff where every session we're balancing the pelvic floor, the pelvis, balancing the shoulder girdle, balancing the neck. And everything is coming back to that place of balance.
So knowing a little, because Feldenkrais is similar a little. Sometimes there's movements and there's moving the body, and that idea of compensation, like we compensate through life, right? So you're getting rid of the compensations. And was it Jen I was talking to you about, like when people are on the table, that shit comes out emotionally, because where they've held things, they can start crying for no reason, feeling pain for no reason. They can move through memories while their body's moving with no other stimulation other than moving the body. Does that happen in Rolfing?
It's very common. What we see is, and what's really fun right now is the science of fascia is really starting to get the hard evidence. For so many years it was theory based, and now we're getting scientific evidence of what is going on. Fascia is starting to be considered the largest organ in the body. It's starting to be. It used to be thought of as just this innate connective tissue that didn't do anything but hold together. Now we're starting to see that it holds form. There's a guy named Gil Hedley who did a dissection of a human body and separated the fascial network from the body, and it held form. So
What?
And I'll come back to a more direct answer. So what we're starting to realize is muscles are used for movement to do this, our bones are so that we could hold weight up, and the fascia is what actually holds us upright. If we didn't have fascia, we would just be a ball of a bag of bones and meat. So what we're all seeing under the microscope, and this is really where it gets fascinating, is that trauma from physical impact or mental emotional impact, if you will, creates a fascial shift where it looks like these irregular hexagonal patterns. So if you get a cut, your body does everything it can to close that wound.
Mhm.
And you have scar tissue. Scar tissue looks the same as a mental emotional trauma that can be held in the body.
Wow.
What?
So
I love it.
so what happens is when you start to you have that trauma and you compensate, right? I hold my shoulder. It might be minor, it might be major, whatever it is. It's held in your body. When you start to open that up and become erect and hold your alignment in place, there's a book called The Body Keeps Score. It's becoming fairly popular.
You're the third person this week to tell me that book. Like
Third person
right
means,
now, I'm gonna order it because you're the
third
third
person
person.
means it's time to read it.
Yeah.
Which he talks all about how the body holds mental emotional trauma. So what happens is you start to reposition, reorganize the fascia, which over years you're holding so much emotion in that. So I very commonly people have emotion, tears come up, emotions moving, whether it's on the table or in the days following. Now the beauty with Rolfing or that's type of work is shifts continue to happen after you leave. So you get a little more upright as you move into your day-to-day life.
Very cool.
That's super cool.
You're remembering.
We got you.
There we go.
Yeah.
Your body's remembering how to hold itself, and shifts continue to happen, and emotions can and do very frequently get moved.
It's pretty amazing. Like I feel like all of the body is amazing. And I trust all of these things. And for the time when, we need to learn this stuff because there's so much generational trauma. There's so much trauma that we hold in our DNA that we didn't even experience in this world, but like our ancestors experienced that we're still holding on to. And I feel like our generation, when I look at my parents or my grandparents, I've lost so many friends and I'm 47. They did not have that. They didn't have that. And I'm supposed to have the longest lifespan, right? Of all of it, right? Don't look at me like that. Like I'm supposed to be living longer and having the longer life. But in the meantime, I couldn't even count on two hands the amount of friends I've lost from cancers, from traumas, from drug addictions, all of that. It says something about this generation. I'm Generation X. I don't know what you're, Zennial or Generation X?
Well, no, I'm that in between generation where I'm old millennial, young Gen X. So.
But we better get on this shit because fucking generation. I always start cursing at the generations behind us have given us a ton of shit to deal with, and it is starting to affect our generation, I think. And so, like all of this stuff that sits in our bodies, we need to start taking care of it, whether it's, doing Rolfing or whether it's doing, what it Feldenkrais or whatever it is you do, but like starting to understand that our bodies communicate with us and they are here and they're holding things and we need to release it. That's like so important. Don't you think?
No, I think that's an incredible piece because, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here. Western medicine for a long period of time, as long as it's been Western medicine, has focused not holistically,
No.
right? And so it's kind of, ironically enough, the invention of the microscope was both amazing and also problematic because it got people to understand things that they hadn't seen before physically, but at the same time, it caused them to be hyper focused on those things that they hadn't seen before. And it's almost like they completely forgot all of the rest of the stuff that used to be very healthy and work beforehand. And so, like, I think when we speak, a lot of the time we talk about Eastern medicine, it's very much mind-body balance. And Western medicine is very much body-centric. It's very physical with very little in terms of the mental. And what's funny is, not to
but
like
it's physical, but compartmentalized.
well, not to go on like a rant, but Western medicine, what's funny is the only time they mention the mental aspect of things is when they can't explain when they can't explain the physical.
Or
right?
it's a side effect.
So it's
Doesn't
like
have to say it.
it's
Suicidal ideation.
it's like, well, oh, obviously it's not physical, so you must be stressed or have anxiety or be depressed or something like that. I love the fact that, you know, Rolfing, amongst other techniques, really kind of focuses on that mind-body balance and reconnecting those things, where I think a lot of people have been duped into thinking that they're separate, or even, you know, emphasizing the physical over the mental aspect of things. I mean, when people come to you, is it like, how does it manifest? Is it usually like, oh, I have physical pain in my shoulder, like what's going on? Is that typically the new client that walks in the door?
Yeah, I get a assortment of different people. You know, I do a lot of advertising more in the realm of pain and postural issues, fatigue. But I do, because of things like the body keeps score and awakening this. I can't remember. There's another book. It's slipping my brain right now. But there's certain people that are bringing a lot of the mind-body connection into the scientific world. So people are starting to want to move some of the somatic stuff. They want somatic therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's like really big right now, like the somatic movement and the fascia. Like, so I know as a woman, like I was working my hips, like, because I'm like, I got stories in here, and I was doing some somatic stretching, and all, you know, I like, it brings up emotions. And then I go to Mary, our massage therapist, and she does Reiki, and she goes, wow, you got a lot going on. Because I was bringing it up from my hips, but she was releasing it. And by the time I got off her table, I felt like I was a cowboy walking. Like I had cowboy might not be the right word, but I was like maybe Gumby, because my hips were like, there was nothing there. I was like, oh, this is an interesting way to walk. But so it's so big right now. But I wonder, gosh, have you ever combined your work with Rolfing with the rites of passage?
So the big intention, because there's the other layer of my work is holistic lifestyle coaching, which that's through the Chek Institute, CHEK, guy named Paul Chek. And the intention is to ultimately have a year-long program for people. And it's, you know, it's really, what does somebody want to accomplish, right? Does somebody want to work with me? And, you know, if somebody was to spend a year with me, it's almost, I would almost have to send them my condolences for what they might experience the rest of their life. Like, you know, like, because I don't have that filter. Like, I see all the bullshit in the world. It's not necessarily the easiest thing. Like, I'm sure you're both very aware. Like, when you start being aware of what's going on in the world, it's not the easiest thing.
That's why he was black-pilled all morning.
You probably feel it just like a lot of other people. And you know what? It's not, you know, it's funny is it people are coming to this point from so many different places, even outside of the holistic world. Right. But like, what's funny is a lot of people are coming to this understanding that not necessarily, I mean, like, you could say that you've been lied to, right? Like, a lot of people would think that they've been lied to. I think a lot of people also need to realize that they were basically lying to themselves as well for a long period of time. to take some, self-ownership of the situation. But the beauty is that someone like yourself now, you're born into a time period where, had you been born maybe like 10 or 15 years earlier, you wouldn't have been in a place to help as many people, because I don't think the timing was right. Like, some of these things came onto the scene in like the 60s and 70s, but at the same time, it was still such a small subset of people that were really kind of open and receptive to these things. And so I think a lot of folks that are in this realm are almost kind of like, you feel like you're lucky, like you hit the lottery, because you're in the right time and place to help a lot more people than had you been born at a different point in time, right? Like, one of your past lives, you may have been holistic and in this place, and just, you're like, look, we should try some somatic release or whatever. And the person's like, you're freaking stupid. Like, what the hell's going on, right? Like, I think a lot more people are receptive now to it. I mean, do you feel like you still have, like, there's still a big learning curve, right? Like, I mean, is most of your job really trying to get people to understand what these things are and how they can help them? Or have you noticed a shift where people are searching this stuff out and they kind of find their way to you because they're looking for the information themselves?
I do a lot of education. I definitely have to teach people, and I get a handful of people that do come to me, but I would say it's 70% education at the current moment. And I just moved to a new place, so it's part of that. And I was thinking about this. You're talking a little bit ago. There's the perspective of illness and pain and cancer, inflammation being the problem, right? It's demonized, and our approach is to kill that, to end the cancer, to kill the pain, whatever it is. It's let's stop that, versus flipping it over and welcoming it in as a teacher. It's like, why in the first place? What is this thing showing me?
Yeah.
It's not 1 week or a month that someone develops cancer or an autoimmune disease. It takes years. It takes work. So ask the question of why is this here in the first place? And a lot of people aren't ready to hear that, because it means, like you're saying, you have to take accountability for your own actions, that you are actually responsible for the pain you feel in your body, and not somebody else or this thing out there.
I just thought of the analogy of Paul Revere, right? Like the mysticism of Paul Revere's ride, and him running to tell people that the British are coming. And what would have happened if the townspeople shot Paul Revere and they were like, stop, we don't need any of that in our lives. Stop telling us that the British are coming, right? Like, that's basically what we do, right? Like, your body's like, something's not right. And
we're like, shut up.
Our technique is like, shut your mouth. We don't need to hear about that, right? Like, what did
the perfect analogy.
That's incredible, right? Like, could you imagine? We need to like do an animated film about that. Like,
we should do that for this podcast and send people. That's freaking
so
awesome.
good.
Yeah, no, that's completely. And there's so many other analogies that are like it too, but it's like
check engine light.
Yes. Yeah.
Just ignore it.
Just remove the engine. Yeah, like
remove the light. Put a piece of tape on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Western medicine, they're right there, right? Like, see, no more problem, Yeah, what's funny is it's like funny in a dark humor kind of way. It's almost insanity when you talk about it from that standpoint, because you're like, what are we doing, right? Like, what? How did we ever get to this point, right? But truthfully, again, it's that gut check moment, right? It's like, okay, we're all complicit in it. You could defer the blame to whoever you want, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you can't abdicate like my friends and I talk a lot about moral authority, right? You can't abdicate moral authority for your own well-being, your own life choices. You can't just say like, oh, I was duped into it or whatever. Because at some point in time, you have to also come to the realization that if you were duped into something, that you're not very intelligent, right? Like now, I'm not saying that people aren't intelligent, but what I'm saying is I think a lot of people,
They don't quite. It's the critical thinking.
they hand
can be
over
intelligent without
their
critical
intelligence,
thinking.
like they give it away, right? But yeah, it's there's a very big emotional and psychological disconnect that has to be healed. I think you're working on two levels that are extremely needed and timely.
See, that's what I was saying. Like, wouldn't it be cool to be able to do like 10 sessions of Rolfing and then go and have that like rite of passage and be in that like aligned place, having released things, going to that like the death, what was it? The death lodge, and then moving like the whole, that would be like such an absolute transformative process, and to be like in alignment in your body, having released what you need to release, moving forward. And then on top of, not only if you're going backwards to have a rite of passage, you're now a rite of passage having now released things and moving forward, right? Like a new you. So it'd be interesting if you mixed that and kind of played with that. I'm sure not many people are putting the two together. I could be wrong.
I don't know anyone. There might be doing some body work and
yeah,
wilderness guiding, but I don't know of anyone.
Just because, you know, it's the 10 sessions. I mean, I don't know, it might take a long time to do it, but it would be an interesting thing to connect with it, because if you can free yourself from the physical pain, work through the emotional pain, work through those traumas, and then it's like you're free to experience that rite of passage in my head when I see it that way. It could be such a powerful experience.
Yeah.
And I've also thought of it in terms of what can someone integrate as well. Like,
is it too much?
Is it too much? Everyone's going to be different, but that might be a lot to take on in a year.
It can't be more than doing a rite of passage and then going to a Chinese buffet.
Yeah.
I mean, I could be wrong.
I'll couple that one in. We'll do all three.
Wait, when you told that story, my first impression was like, I think I can just kind of imagine myself being physically ill. Yeah. Like having that, not in a negative way, but that isolating, beautiful experience, and then being just smacked in the face with sparkling lights and
and the constant pulse. Oh my God.
Mile-long food buffet full of not food and tons of people and noise and like all this other stuff. Like, oh my God. Like,
I'm so sensitive too. Like when I come out of a fast, I feel the first time I feel my phone gets data, I could feel it. Just, it's like a wall I hit.
Yeah.
I'm just so sensitive to the natural rhythms of nature.
That's beautiful.
Do you crave now, like when you're not like grounding out in nature, do you feel like you really need to do that at least like every day, just get your feet in the grass?
I live in a fairly rural place. I mean, it's like quarter mile to the ocean or the Strait of Fuca. I can see the mountains out my window right here. So I am in a place that supports my existence.
Yeah. I want to be by the mountains and the beach.
Is there any property for sale?
I don't want to be in Washington.
Yeah, there are.
I'm not sure if Washington's the medical. We're very like unschoolers, we're like medical freedom people. I don't want to move. I'm already in New Jersey, which is great for unschooling and homeschooling, but not so much for medical freedom.
I'll let you answer this one, Nicholas, if you want to. You don't have to, okay? My read on states like Washington and Oregon is that what most people think Washington and Oregon are is what life is like in, say, like Seattle and Portland. And then once you get outside of there, in fact, the further you get away from there, everything that you think about that state in
It's
terms
wrong.
of like those cities is flipped on its head.
Because it's
Right.
close to Idaho, right? Like there's parts of Washington that are close to Idaho. Is there parts of Washington?
Yeah, eastern Washington
Yeah.
is connected to Idaho.
Yeah.
It's the same with California. California is a very conservative farming state. It's just that you have
The cities run it.
major cities, and I think that's the case. Yeah, Washington. It's you have like Seattle. You have the Western Cascade, which is like Bellingham into Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver, Washington, which is very liberal based, and you have a very conservative outreach in the more rural places. Oregon for sure. Yeah.
See, we should annex the cities.
We
That's
could
what
go
people want.
to Idaho, and
Yeah.
you're close to Washington.
No.
Because those people I met from Idaho who are unschoolers, they said they go into some place in Washington for food sometimes.
But what I'm telling you is that if you met the average person from rural Washington, they'd be like, whatever happens in
It's not me.
what's the capital of there? Helena?
It's
Helena's
not
Montana.
Oh, sorry, no, that's Montana. It's
Seattle.
Might be Seattle. Actually, Olympia.
yeah, Olympia. Yeah. So whatever happens in Olympia, they're like, the hell with those people. I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want. Like that was my impression, because like I've talked to a number of people specifically from Oregon that are more kind of like in the rural areas of Oregon, which is pretty much most of Oregon.
Yeah.
Like that's the other thing that people forget.
Oregon's very rural. I mean,
Yeah, like, and so like they're out in the middle of the rural area of Oregon, and they're like, yeah, we don't care what those city folk do. Like we just do our own thing, you know.
But I like a cafe.
You.
I want to be able to not have to like fly in groceries. I mean, I know that you can make your own.
I gotta be honest right now. I'm feeling like I gotta fly to Washington and do a 4-day fast in the forest. Like it sounds absolutely fantastic.
So his dad died a year and a half ago.
A little over a year.
And that was a big turning point for you, I think.
Yeah.
He hasn't done any rite of passage since then.
Yeah.
I've been working with Orphan. You haven't done that much work.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting for you. You're not allowed to fly. We have 3 kids. He's not really allowed to leave me for very long.
Wait. Hold on, Nicholas. It gets worse. We have 3 kids, and then we have 3 dogs, a cat, a bearded dragon she doesn't like to clean up after, a rabbit. What else do we have?
2 rats.
Yeah, 2 rats. That's right.
Yeah. So, and we feed the dogs raw, which I don't do. So they would starve.
We don't live in the wilderness, but we've basically created the wilderness in our home.
No, but yeah, no, I could see why you would connect and resonate with this. Is there like a place where you can find, like, if people aren't able to go to Washington, like people who run wilderness stuff like you do?
Like a network or anything?
Every network, yeah.
There's a place called Wilderness Guides Council, which I don't personally associate with, or they're going through a transition in their organization that I don't know the direction that they're going, or do I know what is going to be the outcome of it. Traditionally, the idea was for all the rite of passage organizations to be able to communicate and know where each other is going to be holding ceremonies. I'm personally sitting with what, how do I put it delicately? I don't want to talk bad, or I think everyone has the best intention, but I see a lot of are we enabling someone and comforting them versus acknowledging what they went through and honoring it. So there's this whole culture of almost comforting and being like, yes, you are right in that, versus holding someone accountable. And I don't, it's a tricky place right now. And I will recommend individual guides. I can't personally recommend organizations because I don't know who the guides might be.
And
Fair
do you
enough.
ever like say someone wanted to have you and you didn't, they live in like New Jersey, say, can people fly you out to do that kind of thing? Or because you're not really from that area, you wouldn't necessarily?
It's not out of the question. It would really depend on, they would almost have to have a space, you know, like the Pine Barrens. I don't know the East Coast well enough.
Is it mostly say like federal land that you do these on? Is it private land? Like how does that work?
I've always done it on public land.
Okay.
I've never actually done it on private land, but definitely possible.
You know who needs rites of passage? I used to work at a juvenile justice detention center for boys. They needed this. They needed this. No, you would have had to run it in the jail because that's where they were.
Well, I mean, like this is a conversation for another day, but
they needed that.
The culture of say like gang life, they step in and they create a rite of passage.
They do,
but usually it's a destructive rite of passage, right? But so anyway, that's a conversation for
but like this is so needed for our specifically our teens. Like those kids were so good.
Most
of them are dead now. Like I don't know anyone who survived except one person. And the only reason he survived, they all died of gang violence. The only reason he survived was because the company I worked for took him under their wing and found him shelter and a job. And they like took him under because he was one of the first people that went through the program, but everyone else died. The minute they got out, they got into gang violence. And like these people need it. And what they have at the jail is like they even have, if you die in the jail, there's a graveyard in the prison where you have to stay. I don't know if you have to stay. I don't know, but I just know that everyone knew of that graveyard within the fence. I mean, there's just these kids need it. They oftentimes don't have father figures. Their mothers are not around. Like there's nobody to guide, and gosh, it's so needed here, at least in New Jersey. In those areas. Yeah. I don't know where that was going. I felt it, so I said it.
We'll have to find someone locally, but I definitely feel like I want to fly out to Washington.
You want to be out in the wilderness of Washington.
Yeah.
Because the bears here scare you.
Well,
they're nice here.
I would say the other alternative is, psychedelics or something, but it sounds like a 4-day fast probably gets you to a similar place in terms of your receptiveness to.
We did do a 3-day water fast, and he did not make it.
That's not true.
No, he didn't make it. He was like 7 hours, and I was like, I'm ready to go. I'm all good, right? He's like, I'm gonna make eggs or whatever you make. He's like, I'm gonna make it now. He's like, do you want some? And I'm like, well, you're breaking it. So he doesn't do well on fast.
If it was just as simple as a water fast, if you then brought me to the Chinese buffet at the end, I would have been like shoveling food in
the whole thing. I don't know how he did it. I'm like, I can't eat that much. It's been like over 7.
Oh, that's a good question. So at the end of the 4 days, is there now you might kind of allow them to go back into nature or whatever, or into their daily life and see that juxtaposition. But is there any prescribed, like, go easy, like eat this and this so that you don't end up just kind of like completely breaking your fast and going crazy? Or do you just kind of leave people their own devices?
No, that doesn't work out very well.
Yeah.
I've always provided a break fast with like miso and eggs and something easy on the stomach. And then afterwards, it can be it's on them.
Yeah.
And, I've always held people stay 4 days after the fast before they go into the town generally. But it's not the case for everyone holds them differently.
I think you would have had a better time with the fast if you were on because we had the kids we had to feed still. So
it's
you didn't have that.
Yeah, that's
tough at home.
That's difficult. Yeah.
But he was dying. He was like, I need to eat. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know. I think I could go another day.
There was Nicholas, there was no brotherhood. You
didn't have the community.
Yeah. Yeah, there was the two of us, so like we knew each other's
You pulled me down. You
trials and
pulled me
tribulations,
down.
but no, I did not.
You did.
No.
You made me eat because you
I
ate
gave you
in
the
front
option.
of me.
I gave you the
It
option.
wasn't right. But it's probably like, well, I have to tell you, I felt great after the fast.
No, I definitely felt good. I know that much.
I felt, and I was just saying I want to fast more often.
Yeah. But so if people want to find out more information about you and what you do, where can they go?
I have a website, wanderingbearwellness.com, Instagram, Wandering Bear Wellness, Facebook. I'm starting to reintroduce my Facebook world. Most of my work is most of the information online is based on my holistic health practice or my Rolfing practice. I am in the next year going to start doing a bit more again with the rite of passage work. It's just me transitioning into the new space and revisioning what my work is going to look like in that field. I spent a couple of years helping start a initiatory rite of passage school, and that we put that on pause. So I'm revisioning what that's going to look like.
I feel we were just talking today about how just being his black-pilled self, like, like I was just saying that I think sometimes when I think about how far, so we were talking transhumanism, right? We were talking about, we watched Dell, Big Tree on the High Wire, which we always talk about every Sunday because we end up watching it, about transhumanism and where we're going and what's happening. And like that shit, that train is on the tracks. And I feel like it's just going to continue moving. And I said to him, like, there's all this stuff, like, how do you even stop when someone is trying to put satellites to block the sun of our planet to change the, like, I don't even know, like, that affects everyone, right? And I was saying to him, like, I think where it ends up being, what you have to, like, if you really want to protect yourself and your family, it lies in quantum physics. It lies in meditation, in your consciousness field, because that is like the only thing you really, when it comes to the pesticides, the air, the water, none of that shit is clean. You can try your hardest, but you're not, like, you can't do that. Like, you're going to live outside your house at some point. You're not going to have a filter when you need, there's so many things. 5G. How many people have these smart meters on their phone? All of this 5G and all this stuff. You're looking at me like I'm crazy, but
no,
all
this
stuff is going on, right? So my feel, like what I said to you earlier was, like, I think it lives in quantum physics, in knowing that we're all energy, that we can shift our energy, that we do have these traumas in our body, that we can heal them, that we, that if we live and we raise our consciousness and we start to move into these different subtle energies of love, of forgiveness, of all the, like, I think that's where you have to put your energy, because shit, they're putting satellites to block the sun. Like, I can't change that. Like, what the fuck is going on, right? And they were just talking about aerosol vaccines. Like, there was a patent that was done for aerosol vaccines. How are you supposed to, stop that? And so I feel like if you can get, what is your thought on that? Do you think if you can get to that, like, consciousness, quantum, science place, that's where it's at?
I think right now and in the years to come, it's going to get really important to be able to have a clear inner knowing, to be connected to the deeper part of you that knows, and to not give your power away. It's going to be in my opinion of where we're going, I think it's going to be really hard to differentiate reality from artificial intelligence, and if somebody calls you, if it's actually them. So really being able to sit in your inner knowing and be able to make decisions from that place versus the place of somebody else telling you what to do is really going to be important. And to continue to do inner work. Like, we think about the problems externally, But the problems externally are a representation of our internal conflicts, right? I'm not saying blocking the sun with satellites makes any sense, but where does it might sound crazy, but where does that live within me? Like, where there is some conflict inside of me, and we are a species that is connected. So to have that shift inside of me, like I'm saying, when you have shifts and conversations in the ceremonial space, things happen, things shift in the physical realm. The same thing happens when we do our inner work, is things will shift externally from the internal work.
Energy warriors. That's what the spiritual warriors. That's what we were talking about with Shane.
Yeah. And then also that idea of that intuition, going back to like Jem's work with the HD, with human design, that's your strategy and authority.
Yeah.
So like, even if it's like your inner work, it's your intuition, your strategy and authority in human design, your, however you look at it.
Yeah.
Your spiritual, he was a light warrior.
Light warriors.
Light warriors.
Yeah.
Light warriors.
You can call it whatever you want.
You're like, I got my light
Yeah.
light warrior.
Yeah. All right. I'll give you last crack.
That was that's where I was all day, was thinking about
that's your closing argument.
Humanism thing. But this, see, like people like you, Nicholas, people like Jem, people like, Shane, these are the people that are going to be these leaders eventually, because the other shit's gonna fall down. And we're gonna need people to build us up from the inside out.
Yeah.
And so start now.
Yeah.
I think.
And you know what? I'll add one more thing, because I think this is really important. That it's two parts. So there's so much shit that happened over the generations before us, and unfortunately, it's our responsibility to clean up their shit. It's unfortunate, but we need to take responsibility and clean that shit up. But it can feel so overwhelming that we have to do it in this life, that we have to do it right now, where I fully believe it's important that it's not like, I want to see a space where every person, when they get to 14, 15, 16, 18, they have the opportunity to go through a rite of passage. That's probably not going to happen in my lifetime. Like, I'm fully aware that that's the case. But if I can start to build the foundation, if I can start to clean up the mess, if I can start to do these things, so the next generation, 4, 5, 6 generations from now, they have a chance, right? It's the saying, I'm going to plant a tree whose shade I'm never going to sit under. You have to plan ahead for the future generations and not get caught up on them that it has to happen in my lifetime. We're working in the direction, so then the next generations have an opportunity.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot. I mean, at least in my circles, like where I am with a lot of, even in the non-holistic moms groups, I know I'm more connected with women, but I feel like more and more people are. I see saying like, well, let's make a big deal about this. Let's do something good about it. Let's move it. And in the holistic groups, particularly, I feel more like I've always known about rites of passage, and I've always known how I've, walked our kids through certain things. And so I do think there is a hope there. I think there's like a whole bunch of us, maybe it's Gen X, I don't know.
Well,
who are coming to it now.
Well, I love, Nicholas, that you're walking through a bunch of fathers who eventually, whether it's in your lifetime or in the next, will have sons or grandsons that will walk through those rites of passage.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it.
Anything else?
I think that's awesome.
Good to go? All right.
Does Nicholas have anything else?
Yeah. Do you have anything else that you want to share with the audience before we hit the outro?
I feel like that was a good enough outro for me.
Awesome. All right.
Lovely.
Stick with the green room. We're going to talk to you afterward. Everyone, thank you very much
Are you
for.
putting all the stuff in the show notes?
Yes, yeah. Everything's in the show notes or in the comments. And
What was that book again? Too like I'm gonna get that book.
Body keeps score.
Body keeps 3 times in a week.
Yep.
Holy crap!
and
That's the universe.
I pulled it up on the video too.
Oh,
so.
good. So
Yeah.
So,
So with that, thank you everyone for making it to the end. We appreciate it. Again, help us with the algo, do all the good things, and see you next week.
next week.
Peace.
Check on your mind, it's time to redefine. You're the spiritual quest, leaving the rest behind. Ungovernable, breaking through the status quo. We untamable, watch our spirit elevating consciousness. Yeah, we on the rise. No system can hold us down, we're reaching new heights. Breaking through the chains, breaking through the wall. Ungovernable energy, watch the empire fall. Crashing in the norm, shedding no beliefs. Seeking truth and purpose, finding inner peace. Unleashing our potential, setting our souls free. Ungovernable spirits, changing our reality.